this year has been a confusing one. With Apple dropping their latest M4 chip in the Pro lineup, a new Apple Pencil Pro, some nice improvements to the Magic Keyboard, one could argue that this year the Apple lineup of iPads is probably some of the best hardware that Apple have ever delivered. Easily the best iPads they have ever made. But with minor and quite underwhelming updates to the iPad Air, and with previous generations of iPad already being so powerful for iPadOS, where does this leave the iPad lineup? Here's my big fat iPad review. So you'll probably fit into one of two categories for this video. Either you're just on YouTube and you're intrigued by the new iPads and you've seen incredible videos by people like MKBHD and Byte Review and numerous other people, or you're actually considering buying one. Instead of reviewing these devices separately, I've brought together both of the iPad Pro and the Air in one larger review. Below, I'll time code the different devices so you'll be able to see and skip to whichever you're most interested in. Towards the end, I'll break it down and make some recommendations. Now, if you do enjoy this video, it would be much appreciated if you hit a like, a comment, and subscribe down below. Having come back to YouTube recently, I've been making plenty of tech reviews in the near future. Okay, so now let's get on with it. Right, let's talk about the new iPad Pro. The latest generation iPad Pro is one of the best pieces of tech I've ever used. As a huge lover of OLED displays, literally from my iPhone to my TVs behind me and my new monitor, I absolutely love the technology of OLED. Apple's new use of tandem OLED, essentially stacking two OLED displays on top of each other, is absolutely phenomenal. One criticism of OLED previously has always been about brightness and not really being able to get to the brightness of things like LCD and even mini LED. But over the past few years, there have been some huge changes to this. And if you watch any of Spawn Point's videos on the new LG TVs that have come through, you can really see that each year they're getting like 20, 30 to 50% brighter. With tandem OLED, we see a huge jump in performance, especially in brightness. Apple here are claiming 1,600 nits of peak brightness and 1,000 nits of the entire screen brightness, which is absolutely incredible. This really means you can use this device anywhere, so out in pure daylight, and you can use it out and about, and especially at home. And what's incredible is now we have that brightness, but all of the benefits of OLEDs, those incredible deep blacks with the pixels being able to turn off, and the new iPads are rocking a 2 million to 1 contrast ratio. For context, the Apple Studio display, which I just reviewed, is an LCD panel and rocks about a 1000 to 1 contrast ratio. You can really see the difference here. One benefit of OLED compared to mini LED, which we'd seen before in the past as well, is that it eliminates that blooming effect because it's down to an individual pixel level. So what I've done here is really try to compare both the OLED display of the new Pro, the mini LED display of my old iPad Pro, and the iPad Air's LCD display. It's pretty tricky to try and get this across on YouTube and how we film, but from observations, well, LCD is easily the worst here. You can see the entire back panel and it has that kind of grayed out effect. Mini LED, actually in the test that I did, surprised me with how good it was. And I think there were some differences in how good the panels came across, and I seemingly had quite a good variant. You can see slight blooming around the white line, but it is really difficult to see. But on OLED, well, there's just no blooming at all and easily has the best picture here. While I have tried to get this across with B-roll, really genuinely have some time with the OLED panel on the Pro. It really is a step change in technology, and just how crisp, clear, just everything looks absolutely phenomenal. In terms of brightness, I think this is really on par with mini LED, so there's no trade-off now between the two, but you're actually getting all those benefits of OLED. From my time using the devices as well, it's really nice to see this technology come into the 11-inch variant. The 11-inch Pro missed out on mini LED last time around with a major iPad update. For me, this was a huge missed opportunity and the reason that I went with the 12.9 inch. So now, having the best-in-class display on both of the Pros, you're not having any sort of trade-off here. You literally have to pick which one you prefer based on portability and just screen size. Okay, so Apple have made the iPad Pro their thinnest device ever. So it's actually now thinner and lighter than the iPad Air, which I think many reviewers have commented on now makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. There's also been a lot to talk about here. Apple have obviously promoted it, and loads of reviewers who got their hands on this initially were like, look how thin this is. Now, it is thin. It is ridiculously thin. The autofocus on cameras struggles to actually pick up the iPad now it is that thin. Now, while holding the device, you can really feel it, and it does feel quite incredible that they have made something look this good with this power and the battery life this thin. But in all honesty, I would have preferred something that was slightly more robust. It does feel more fragile, even though it is stronger, and I know it has been completely obliterated on other YouTube channels. Having that slight more ruggedness and kind of just that tactile feel, I feel would have been a huge benefit to this iPad. It also could have eliminated the camera bump, which I'm really surprised that Apple didn't do, but Apple made the decisions on this one. The other thing with making it slightly thicker is that they could have improved the battery life. Now, while in my testing, the battery life has been actually slightly better than my M1 Pro, I am kind of disappointed that there isn't, with the efficiency cores of the M4 chip, an opportunity here to make this last for 15 to 20 hours, similar to what we've seen on the MacBook lineup. Talking about that M4 chip, this is obviously a huge talking point with the new Pro. Now, this surprised me on the announcement. I don't think it surprised other people on Twitter or X who had seen the leaks, but Apple, for the first time ever, have released their M-level chips on an iPad and not a MacBook. Ever since the announcement of that M1 chip, Apple have been easily in front of everybody when it comes to mobile device chips. But with the competition really catching up from people like Snapdragon and recently even Microsoft, I can see why Apple were really quick to bringing out the M4 chip. Snazzy Labs did a really great video describing the upgrades and why Apple have been releasing things like the M2, the M3, and now the M4. I would definitely recommend to give that a watch if you wanted to get a better explanation and a real deep dive of this update. What I wanted to test was, for me, does it make a difference? Well, Apple will tell you that the M4 chip is up to 4 times faster at pro rendering and up to 1.5 times faster in terms of CPU performance than the M2 chip that came before it. It also has hardware accelerated ray tracing and is a powerhouse for AI. That's Apple's discussion, but in terms of other reviews that I've seen about this as well, this is where many reviews have basically said this chip is wasted on the iPad, mainly because of iPad OS. And to be honest, from my time with the Pro, you can kind of see that this level of performance really probably isn't needed, but it is a nice to have. In terms of the marketing spiel, well, it's a bit of a strange one with Apple because they haven't really been leading anything with AI so far, but with WWDC just around the corner, that might change. But at the moment, the M4 chip doesn't really make that much sense. Mentioning things like hardware accelerated ray tracing, well, in an age of PS5s, Xbox Series X's and PCs and things like the Switch, again, I don't think there's a huge market that I've seen for iPad gaming. So having hardware accelerated ray tracing is great, but I've not ever really sat down to think, I'm going to play my games on my iPad Pro. One area that I thought I could push the new iPad Pro was with photo editing. So this is the thing that I've used my iPad Pro for the most and is actually the main reason I had it. The iPad is a thing that I actually took away with me to California for my 2-week road trip around there and did all of the editing of my photos on that device. So what I wanted to do was test this with a mixture of photographs from my A7 IV and Leica Q2. This is where this actually got really interesting. To test the capabilities of Lightroom and this new iPad, I loaded 15 edited raw images on the iPad Pro and the M4 chip and my M1 Pro from a few years ago. The results really here blew me away. We can see that the new iPad with the M4 chip does this in just over 1 minute 40, whereas the older iPad takes over 6 minutes to be able to render just 15 images. This really does show me that the new chip is more powerful, and if you're requiring that speed of execution, then it is really worth the upgrade. Now, for context, I loaded the same 15 images on my M1 Max MacBook Pro in Lightroom and exported. This then took less than 15 seconds. This for me, here lies the fundamental problem. iPad OS and the software and the utilization of that software clearly isn't as good as macOS still. Yes, 1 minute 40 is really impressive compared to 6 minutes, but it is absolutely trounced by 15 seconds. If you are a professional and a professional photographer and speed of execution is what you're needing to get to clients, well, you have to go with a MacBook. And the MacBook is almost 3 years old now and is still way, way quicker. Other major changes that you'll see with this year's iPad Pro is actually in their accessory lineup. So we have a new Apple Pencil Pro and a new Magic Keyboard. Regarding the Apple Pencil Pro, now I'm going to hold my hands up here and I'm actually going to recommend a video up here for you to watch somebody else's because I'm not a graphic designer and I'm actually, as I found out this week, terrible at using Procreate. There are some nice updates to the Apple Pencil from my experience, like the new haptic feedback, and it is really clever with the shadowing piece, but it's not something I can utilize at all. The thing that I'm really disappointed actually with is the fact that the Apple Pencil that I had before is now no longer compatible with this new lineup, which means you have to spend the £120 to get the better pencil. Naughty, naughty Apple. But in terms of accessories, the thing that has actually really impressed me and changed my perception and usage of the iPad Pro is actually the Magic Keyboard. The new keyboard, well, it's expensive. Now, Apple are charging £200 plus, depending on the model that you go for this new keyboard. And it is a lot of money to spend on an accessory. But from using it a couple of weeks, I can actually see why Apple are charging this much for it. The experience of using the iPad combined with the keyboard really does make this like a mini MacBook. And many YouTubers out there have gone with this angle. Can you replace your MacBook with the iPad and the iPad Pro? Honestly, I can kind of understand why people are going to that angle. It really does mean that you get that nice 13 or 11-inch iPad screen. You get a really great quirky keyboard with function keys and a really impressive trackpad that feels so similar to the MacBook Pro lineup that I can understand why people would say this. Ultimately, with how Windows work and that utilization of things like ports, I do think these are very separate products and deserve to be that. But what I would say is with the combination of the keyboard, it does make the iPad experience better. The click and the travel of the keyboard is actually surprisingly nice. And I had this with the 11-inch, and it did take a little bit of time to get used to the size of the keyboard as it was a little bit smaller. I kept on hitting S instead of A, but once you get used to it, it really is a nice experience. So nice that I actually wrote this entire review on the iPad Pro. Having the function row as well was a really nice upgrade, and Harper's back to removing things like the touch bar, RIP, and when Apple went back to having good keyboards again, which was on the M1 lineup of MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros. Using the keyboard actually made iPad and iPadOS actually feel quicker and snappier, and I was able to get to things like Windows, and just using the device was a nicer experience having the keyboard. One thing that I would note is it's not light, it is actually quite chunky, and even though the iPad Pro is their thinnest and lightest device ever, adding the keyboard actually means that the weight isn't too dissimilar to things like a MacBook Air. When I took it and used it out and about and put it in my bag and added a camera, to be honest, having that weight and the camera wasn't that different to carrying around my 16-inch MacBook Pro. Okay, so that leads us on to the iPad Air part of the review. Well, what can I say about this update? I can't lie, I feel like this is a bit of a lost product. It looks great. It's simple, it's clean, and now with the M2 chip, it is meant to be super quick. But there are a few things with this device and this update that have really disappointed me when it comes to actually using the device. While I've only been a praise of the iPad Pro's OLED display, this is the main issue that I actually have with the iPad Air. Apple have kept this as a 60Hz LCD display. And what that now does is if you ever use the Pro at 120Hz, it means and makes this iPad Air feel so slow. Regardless of how quick the chip is, just using the device side to side, it feels night and day different. One thing I was thinking of is now the fact that the 11-inch Pro has got the OLED screen and ProMotion. This could have allowed Apple to bump up the Air's display, keep it at LCD, that's totally fine, but bump it up to 120Hz just to make it feel snappier and more responsive. I put this on Threads as a thought, and it sparked a lot of conversation between what a Pro device is and ProMotion versus what the Air is, and it was a really, really interesting conversation there. But with that lack of an update, I really struggle to see who this device is for. Unless a thing that was stopping you buying the previous gen Air was the new orientation of the webcam, I really don't see what going from an M1 chip to an M2 chip on the Air is really going to be as a compelling option to purchase. In all seriousness, Apple do some great back to school promotions, especially when it comes to kind of like the end of summer. The iPad Air is typically something that they discount as a really nice discount to have, and it does mean that you can get a better iPad for a slightly cheaper price. I do get that the price difference here is about £300 to £400, and that is a big jump between the Pro and the Air. And I do understand also that the Air does tick a lot of boxes. It is quick, it has a camera, it has iPad OS, which is, you know, as I said, slightly limited. And the Air does tick those boxes. You can put a keyboard with it, you can use the new pencil. That all makes sense, but I do think there is potentially a better option here. So my recommendation, if you're looking at the Air this year and thinking, okay, M2, nice update, it's clean, have a look at Apple's manufactured refurbished parts of their website. On here, you'll find the last generation of iPad Air, which does most things that this one does, but at a discount, but also the last generation of iPad Pro. The 11-inch iPad Pro had a LCD 120Hz display, which makes the device feel quicker and nicer to use. The processing power is still there with the M1 and the M2 chip, so there's really only the display that is a major difference here. That would be my recommendation for this year's iPad Air, is look at the previous generation iPad Pro. Okay, so should you buy? To round off this review, I think the iPad Pro on its own is one of Apple's best ever devices. It is the absolute benchmark when it comes to tablets. But if we're being honest, it has been for years, and this year is no different. The Pencil is a great update if you are going to be able to utilize those new functionalities, including the clever pinch piece and the shadowing and all of that good stuff. And the keyboard, again, as I've mentioned, is a really great update and accessory. And the Air, to be honest, I feel is like a really lazy update. So probably isn't something that I would recommend to most people. Now, that's if you don't have an iPad. But what if you already have an iPad? If you've already got an iPad that is M1 level or above, I genuinely don't think you need to update. But the new OLED panel is possibly the best ever put on a mobile device. And if you do use the iPad a lot, and you consume a lot of content, you actually create content, and you actually get to utilize the most out of the iPad. Even if you have one from only a few years ago, this screen could be the reason to upgrade. If you also use this as a part of a professional workflow, you could see the difference between last generation M1 and this M4 chip is really quite different. It's about 4 times quicker. So I understand if you want to upgrade for that reason as well. I do feel like we're going to get a huge upgrade. I'm hopefully get a huge upgrade at WWDC this year, which happens in June. That could mean that we have to relook at all of these iPad reviews and really understand the upgrades that Apple are looking to bring to iPad OS and iOS. So if you've enjoyed this review, remember, hit like, comment, let me know what you think of this review. And if you want to see more reviews in the future, remember to hit subscribe. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.